Welcome, everybody, to the Creating Connections podcast, where I bring voices and perspectives from different people who are making a difference for children's learning and development. I'm Rachel Stewart, and I'm passionate about connecting with people and sharing experiences and learning from each other, how we can best support children to thrive. As founder and director of Practically Learning, I specialise in developing the capacity of teachers and educators through personal development coaching and professional learning programs. I'm endlessly curious about what is happening in our world today, especially in our schools, and how we can share good news stories and strategies for what is working and how to improve the lives of children in our world today and for the future. In this series of the podcast, we are exploring successful leaders in education, so you can learn from a diverse range of people what makes a successful leader and how you can take their learnings and apply them to your leadership. Today, I'm introducing you to a school improvement leader who currently works for the Diocese of Lismore Catholic Education Office in New South Wales in Australia, and who has worked in Catholic education for a number of years as a school leader and educator. Nathan Trezise and I will share in conversation about leadership in education, where you will learn more about his background and how he became a leader, what his visions are for the future, and some of the initiatives he's been involved with to contribute to the improvement of schools and school culture in the Diocese of Lismore. So please welcome Nathan Trezise to the podcast. Hi, Nathan.
How you going?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty well. I look like I'm in a prison, sorry. This is solitary confinement room 1.
It does look a little like that with the bricks in the background.
I could go over here, maybe. The lighting in here is terrible as well. So there's some pictures on this wall.
No, that's okay. The plain background's fine.
That's better.
Yeah, that does look better, actually.
Slightly better than the prison cell I'm in. There's no windows in this building. We're in a temporary office in Coffs Harbour.
Okay.
And we move space in about 2 years once they build it. So
right.
Until then, we've got this really weird setup. So it's got, like, there's a light switch in here that says don't turn this off because meeting room 2 light is attached to meeting room 1. And there could be someone working in there. So
right.
So, but no one can turn the lights off on me, which is good. So I'm controlling of that.
That is a bonus.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could explain where you are in Coffs Harbour, whereabouts that is in Australia, and what it's like there, because I've never been there myself, and some of our viewers or listeners might never have been there either. So it'd be great to hear what it's like.
Yeah, so Coffs Harbour is a beautiful spot. It's halfway between Sydney and Brisbane, and it has beautiful beaches. Australia's most spectacular golf course, voted like 6 years in a row. If you ever look it up, Bonville, it's really nice. And we've got a variety of schools in and around Coffs. So there's some big schools in Coffs Harbour, big primaries and secondaries in our system. And then where I was up in Dorrigo is up on the plateau nearby, so in the hinterland. And my commute to work was up past 2 waterfalls and up past the Gondwana heritage listed rainforest. It was spectacular, absolutely spectacular. So tourism is one of the main focus sort of areas of our region, and then also farming. So where I was in Dorrigo was rich dairy farm land and fertile growing for all sorts of things. So blueberries, bananas, cattle, you name it, they were growing it. They didn't do sheep though, and I always asked why, because it was quite cold up at Dorrigo, and apparently it's too wet for sheep. So
okay, yes, they probably get foot rot.
Foot rot, yeah, I found out about foot rot. I learned lots about cattle when I worked up there, so and whatnot. So
well, it sounds beautiful. I have been up to the New South Wales coast, and I love going up there. It's just so picturesque, and with the beaches and the mountains, and what a beautiful place to work.
Yeah, it's a good spot. Can't see myself going back to Brisbane, so
no.
not a capital city anymore, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, perhaps you could just introduce yourself in the position that you're in at the moment at the Diocese of Lismore Catholic Education Office and start with, I guess, sharing a little bit about your journey. We all have a journey towards the positions that we're in now. And as we know, our lives take all these different twists and turns. It's never linear. And I'm interested to learn sort of how you've landed in the space you're at the moment. And it sounds like you used to live in Brisbane as well. So be good to hear your journey.
Yep, no worries. So my name is Nathan Trezise. I am currently employed as a lead school improvement and performance in the Diocese of Lismore. I've only recently started in this role. So I was a school principal up in Dorrigo since 2016, up until about Easter this year. Prior to that, I was in a couple of different AP roles, so assistant principal roles. So originally I was from Queensland, so I had an AP role in Ipswich, which was mainly on administration and curriculum. And then my first role in leadership was AP curriculum up in Rockhampton. So I did a bit of work. Well, most of my early career was up in Queensland before coming down here to take on the principal role down here. I guess my journey into leadership was more accidental than anything. So my first job was as a teacher on the Gold Coast, and I taught, year 1, year 4, year 3, and then up to year 7, which was then in primary school. And I remember talking to one of, he was like a mentor teacher who worked in the school. He's since passed away, but he'd been teaching for 35 plus years back then. And I said to him one day, how do I get these kids to be better at reading comprehension, as an example? And he goes, well, they just need to read more books. And I was like, surely it's more complicated than just read more books. And so I guess that started my sort of bit of inquiry into how do kids learn. And it was sort of, I wanted to know more. And that approach of just read more, it does work for some, but not all. And then I guess my first role in leadership was assistant principal curriculum. And in Rockhampton, the kids were somewhat disadvantaged, so from a pretty low socioeconomic area. And we just had a focus in that school for 3 years on all kids can learn to read. And we implemented an approach that really went deeply into helping kids with that. And that was just by chance. Like I had an interest in it and wanted to know more. And then this school, that was, we was a government funding literacy and numeracy partnership. And I was lucky enough to be then the literacy and numeracy mentor teacher within the school. So I got all this extra training and professional development for how to do things. And turns out that, learning to read is, just reading more books isn't, it's not as simple as that. So, and we implemented a framework that was devised by Fullen, where we had a moral purpose. So all the teachers were on board with that goal. And then we implemented a gradual release model where there was, like guided reading, modelled reading shared, through to independent and applied across to other subject areas as well. And so it's like, you look back on what you did, this is probably 2009. It was really simple, but we had one focus, and that was probably the reason why we improved. And then, then from there I went on to that school in Ipswich as an assistant principal, and then you sort of replicate that learning probably on a bigger scale because it was a bigger school. In my time in Ipswich, my principal there was really good. He kind of was always having leave, and one term he had off. So he had term 4 off 1 year. And he said, you can run the school and be the principal. And he pretty much said, don't stuff it up, and handed over the control of the school to me, which was really good. It was way before I was ready for that, but it was a baptism of fire. And then he was planning on coming back in January, and then he had a heart attack, and I ended up being the principal again for another term, and then helped him on his return to work. It was a massive heart attack, so he had a long return to work process that year. And so I got probably longer than I would have thought acting experience as a principal of a big school. And then obviously that leads you into that sort of, well, I think I can do this then, and off you go. And then when I went to Dorrigo, I ran a small school, so it was 50 kids, and so you end up back in the classroom a lot, which I really liked as well. So you never lost that currency of teaching practice, and so um, probably my best days in Dorrigo were the ones in the classroom where you're doing the work with the students as well as you're leading teachers to implement new curriculums or measure impact and things like that. So um, I guess you never lose that um, connection to teaching and the joy that teaching brings and working with kids. So
Yeah.
and then I've taken this office job where I hardly ever see kids, and it's like it's very quiet and a little bit boring sometimes because you miss that little bit of why you got into teaching in the first place. So,
And like you said at the start, you feel a little bit like you're in a prison because you're not out there amongst
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's good too. Like in this job, there's other things that you do. So there's lots of learning opportunities in this role. This year, I've been amazed to work with. At the moment, I've got about 13 schools from Grafton up to Casino and into Ballina, and just watching how other principals work and how they're strategic or how they lead their staff, and like that's been great learning on its own. And I didn't get that when I worked in Dorrigo. I was sort of up there, up on the mountain, in an isolated area where you're pretty busy as a small school principal. And I guess that's the one learning I'd take away. If I went back into a principal role, I'd be like, well, make sure you get out and see how others operate and really use your colleagues because they know so much about leading schools as well, and they lead differently to you. And get in amongst it and have a look at what other people do because that's how you learn as well. So that's been a great thing to do. So
Yeah. It sounds like a really great way to sort of, I guess, monitor your own leadership and what qualities you already have and where you can improve. And it sounds like you're a very keen learner, which I guess is part of being a leader as well, is you never know all the answers. You're constantly learning, and especially as an educator, having that attitude of we're always learning. And it's not just about learning strategies, it's about learning about ourselves as well. So I've got a few questions just from that explanation of your journey. And my first question, I suppose, is around the initial realization that there's more to reading than just telling kids that they have to read more books or telling parents that they need to read to their kids. What was it that you discovered is really the challenge around reading? And I know that in my own learning, I've discovered that children need a lot of support with cognitive skills to be able to read and understand what they're reading and comprehend and relay what they're reading and all those sorts of things. What else did you discover that, or did you discover other things that were needed during that process?
yeah, I think it came to me when I worked in Ipswich, and my principal there said to me one day, you don't learn to read through osmosis. You've got to be shown things explicitly, like this is a comprehension approach, or this is something that good readers do, and you have to model that for children. And so I'd probably worked for 3 years as a literacy and numeracy mentor before that sort of penny dropped or that aha moment came. And he equated it to when you learn to drive a car, you don't just watch your mum and dad drive and then all of a sudden you're thrown in the driver's seat and go and drive the car now because you've watched us drive, so you should be right. So it's the same with reading. Like you watch your parents read, but that doesn't make you a reader necessarily. And so reading's about thinking and talking and trying to understand characters or plot or trying to understand concepts that you're reading and make your own mental models and things like that. So there's more to it than meets the eye. Like there's a lot happening for reading. And then the journey along the way, like if you engage in the reading wars and what's happened in education in the last decade or so, probably my learning came late on synthetic phonics and how important they are for children. And so I would have subscribed to the, like you can teach phonics in context type approach, whereas now I'd be a convert to all kids need this base level knowledge in how to decode words before we start teaching them about fluency and vocabulary and comprehension and whatnot. So there's sort of another layer to what I know now that probably wasn't there 10 years ago around, you could just teach it through, M says like in the word moo or moon or something like that. So I guess there's a deepening awareness of the importance of that. And that's probably only come about in the last maybe 2 years because of the curriculum changes that have come in New South Wales. And then when I was in Dorrigo, I had a good instructional leader and she came to me one day and she goes, I think we need to do this approach. And it was initial lit. And I didn't know a lot about it. So I had a quick sort of read, but I knew what we were doing was missing the mark a little bit. We were having a lot of kids come through the early years and they were missing basic understanding of letters and sounds and how it all worked together. And so we went, yeah, let's have a go. And then within 6 months, we were seeing dramatic changes. And what the hope is into the future is those kids getting to year 2 will be able to virtually decode any word, or they'll have a better knowledge of all of that, because then all of the rest of the stuff, which we did well, which is, comprehension, fluency and vocabulary, that's built on that base then of the phonics. Like, they could read, basically, they could understand the words on the page, and then you teach the higher skills, the higher order skills a bit later down the track. And so I had a boy who was in intervention with me, and I was like, he just can't get there. And he'd missed that explicit instruction in phonics, and he was just guessing words all day long, but he could think and talk, but he couldn't decode the words. And so we had to go right back with him. He was in year 4, I think. I was even doing intervention when I was there this year as part of my teaching load. And I remember being frustrated by working with him because I knew what he needed, but the intervention program wasn't going deep enough because it was a bit of, you'd sat on the other side of, that phonics in context was enough, but it wasn't. It was missing the mark for him. And so I know as soon as I left, they were moving into, because we knew that wasn't working, they were going to shift it into another intervention that gave him that base first, because here's the kid who can think and talk and answer any questions about a text and had all this high level, deep, background knowledge, but just could not understand the words on the page and guess his way through it. So yeah, long-winded answer. Did that get to what you were asking?
Sounds like he'd found a strategy to get by, but you'd picked up that he needed the basics to really flourish with his reading.
Yeah, and he was the kid who was an indicator of just what we were doing wasn't working, because we'd watched a few kids come through our early years like that, where you get to most kids and most kids would learn to read, but there was a few that really needed that explicitness early days. And yeah, we had a good handful of kids like that. He was probably the oldest, and we had a few younger ones sort of 2 years behind him. And then I know from touching base back with them this year that they're much happier with how they're tracking since we've switched now, and that we're getting those early years momentum, which is good. So hopefully you get that, then you don't have to do so much intervention, like you get in there early and get everyone on track. So
yeah, and of course research over the years has revealed quite a few new ways to support students, and I'm sure that the research that we're learning about the brain as well and how children are learning is supporting your work as well. I wanted to touch on just being thrown into the deep end by the principal to become principal all of a sudden, and baptism of fire, you described it as. My first question is around that is, what qualities do you think he saw in you to give you that role or to give you that responsibility without you thinking that you were prepared for it? And also, what was that like in terms of where did you actually start when you were put in that position very suddenly?
Yeah, I think when I got the leader roles, I think you win them on your potential to be the right fit, or the AP in that school, and then you work hard to do well in the job. And I think being achievement orientated, he knew like he's got someone in a school who doesn't want to fail. And so it's like, you'll keep the place going and do a good job, as good as you know. And that was all he wanted for, 10 weeks. And it was at the time, the other AP was towards the end of her career, and she'd had a go of being principal, and she was the AP of religious education, and she didn't really want the responsibility of being principal. She was happy sort of to be back up, and our team worked really well together as well. And so we were pretty, well functioning leadership team. And so I think he saw, a chance to, but what he was good at was growing the people he had within the school as well. And so when he would see an opportunity, like for me, for example, he would like, well, you can step up and that's good experience. And then he saw potential in the teachers in the school as well. And he would create middle leadership roles, like it might have been leader of curriculum, or when I started in the school, there was a leader of sort of like behaviour support. And so we were establishing positive behaviour across the school, and that person had done that work for probably 3 years before I started in the school. So it was well embedded, and then we had these great processes, and then he ended up going on to become a principal as well. And so I think probably what he was working at, this principal, was just growing the people who were under him and giving the opportunities to step up. And then I know when I left there, one of the teachers who was in the early years and really experienced stepped up into one of those leader of learning type roles and took on the curriculum sort of delivery and curriculum PL and all that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, what did it feel like? It was high anxiety. So that's the only way I could describe. I remember getting to the end of the 9 or 10 weeks and just going, well, thank God that's over. And then he had a heart attack on me and I had to go again, but that was all right. But I remember one time, because I was quite young when I was doing this work, it was probably 10 years ago now. So I was early 30s, leading a big school. And I remember a dad coming in once and we'd had a serious behaviour problem, and the dad swaggered in because he was a bit, a bit full on. And the dad just looked at me and goes, "You're a bit young to be running this place, aren't you?" And I just, well, I'm the boss, so you do what I say at the moment. And like I just brushed it off, but on the inside, it's like you're getting judged by parents and probably by staff as well, like staff who taught for 40 years, and all of a sudden there's someone who's barely been out for 10 years and they're running the school and things like that. So there's a bit of that sort of anxiety, but there was lots of learning. And when you're in a big school like that, you probably see virtually everything you could see in a school happen, like in terms of behaviour and staffing and issues and whatnot popping up, like injuries and injury management. And
the unpredictability of a school every day.
Yeah, and that put me in good standing, because when I went into Dorigo, there was lots of things that would pop up. And I remember talking with my staff and I said, I've seen something like this before and it's okay. And, it gives you that calmness to know, well, I've seen a bit of this. I reckon we can navigate this together, and you provide a bit of leadership then. Whereas in that place, in that small school, the staff are like, oh, what do we do about this? And then it's like, oh, well, here's what we could do. Here's something that's worked before. Let's try this. And off you go, on this tangent. And there wasn't much when you become a principal then that you hadn't seen. That was an absolute blindside. So, but that's just time, isn't it? That's just experience. You go through leading a big school for a bit over 12 months. And then, the good thing about the heart attack was my principal was still there in the background. And so whilst he might have only done part-time work, he was there every day on the phone if you needed on the phone, or I'd drop into his place on the way to work and just have a chat about what's happening. And then you get a bit of coaching, a bit of mentoring. And so that was the perfect model to then go on to become a principal. It's like you've got someone there helping you to do the work before you're expected to do it by yourself. So probably good training for future principals. Like do a year with someone helping you while you're young and getting ready for that sort of role.
Yeah, so important to have really good mentors and also role models. Did you, apart from your principal mentor, did you have any other models or role models that you looked up to as leaders that may be outside education or as you were growing up that supported you in knowing that you could be a leader and I suppose managing those challenges that do crop up and those anxieties and being judged and all of those sorts of things? How did you take from other people who are leaders, how they actually manage themselves? And you seem like a very calm person. You have to be the calm in the storm when things do go wrong. How did you become that person?
I think that's a personality. That's a personality trait.
Yeah.
I don't think, well, you can learn it probably. I think over time as a principal, maybe I lost a bit of that calm as well, because like it's a crazy mad job. And I take my hat off to the principals doing it right now, because it is pretty full on and you do deal with a lot day to day. And when I talk to principals now, it's like you never know what's coming. You never know what's around the corner. You go out there on bus duty first thing in the morning, and I used to wonder what was coming. I was like, I wonder what today's going to bring.
Yeah.
Not a good wondering usually. So
Be
um,
prepared
yeah, be
for
prepared for
anything.
anything is the motto, isn't it? But no, I don't know. I guess when I went into schools, so I started teaching in the early 2000s, and within a few years, I was interested in doing a Masters of Leadership, because back then in Brisbane, that was the sort of the qualification needed if you wanted to go further. And so while I was young without kids, I went and studied. And then as I was studying, I started to sort of look at the leaders who were working in my school as well, and critique them a little bit in my work, in my writing, but only for the uni lecturer, not to them personally. And then that mentor teacher I talked about earlier, he used to proofread my assignments as well, because he was quite good at grammar and punctuation and all that sort of stuff that was probably a bit of a gap for me. And he used to say to me, oh, you're a bit idealistic in what you're writing, but that's okay. And so but I guess I was watching what they were doing and looking at the good things they were doing, and then looking at things that I'd do differently. Having had no experience at all leading a school, but just sort of looking at them as a learner and just going, oh, I wonder why they do that. And, yeah. And then when I did get my first AP role, so the AP curriculum, the principal there was a really, he would sort of like to know everything about everything that was happening in the school, like to be in control and micromanage to a degree. And I liked working in that space because, you know, you knew Monday morning there's a leadership team meeting, you're held accountable for what you're doing, what you've done, what's coming next, all that sort of stuff. And that was good. And we functioned well as a team. There was another AP as well. And he was good to work for. And then I went on to work in Ipswich, and he was more like a visionary type leader, where he was happy to delegate and let us lead how we wanted to lead, and then he would change his mind. And we used to describe him like his mind was like a plate of spaghetti, so it never went linear. So
He was a big picture thinker by the sounds
yeah,
of
he
it.
was. But
Yeah.
so I went in two contrasting styles, working under two contrasting principles, and both I liked working under. And then when you become a principal, you find your own style, which I would hope is somewhere in between that. But you probably have to ask the teachers who worked under me to find out what they think. And yeah, so I looked at sort of those leader roles, and then coming into this role, I remember watching the person who was the previous lead school improvement, because he worked with me in my school, and then eventually he missed schools and he went back into a school. But I watched him work, and I sat there imagining, I wonder if I could do that work. And then I thought, nah, I wouldn't be able to do that. It's too hard to walk into schools where you don't know any of the staff and run professional learning, or start working with schools on how to vision where they want to be in the future and all of that stuff. So I honestly watched him work and thought he's pretty good at that. And like you start having that self-doubt around what you can do. And then coming into the role, I would even still rate myself not as good as him at that sort of stuff, but certainly able to learn about the role. And maybe probably what I bring that would be different is maybe just coaching principals to do the work themselves. Because lots of our principals have done, I've just watched them sort of do that visioning and the unpacking of where they want to be in the next 3 years themselves. And then, the one thing I wish I could do better as a leader would be, I've watched some really charismatic leaders work with their staff, and it's like something that it's like, I wish I could do that better. Like you have that sort of, gee, that was really good watching them work and how they interact with their staff to get to, where they want to take the school, because it's really down to their vision a lot of the time.
Yeah.
In any case. And so, so it's really just watching people, watching the ones you work with. And then if I could go back to when I started being a principal in 2016, my advice to myself would be get out into these other schools and see how they work, because you've got some really good operators who are more experienced than you and do things different. So that's probably the one thing I probably missed by being off up the mountain, a little bit isolated. And as opposed to, when I was in Ipswich, you got 10 schools within 5 kilometres. So you could have easily visited another school in that setting, whereas down here, my closest school is 30 kilometres away, down a mountain range, past 2 waterfalls that would flood. And it's like, it was treacherous to go and visit a school some days. So,
well, that's great advice, I think, for future leaders in terms of just how you've learned from observing other leaders. And I guess it also is how you bring your own personal qualities and personality to a role, because everyone's different. Everyone has their own way of doing things, but taking bits and pieces from others and then understanding that you're not that person, you're a different person, but you can still bring your own personal style to how you lead.
Yeah, and I think when I started as principal, I didn't like that being centre of attention, like at an assembly type scenario that happens, and happens sort of every week in a school. They look to the principal and you have to say something and talk about something, and I didn't really like that. And when I spoke to one of my other colleagues who works down here in COFs, she said the same thing. She really doesn't like it, but when you watch her, it's like, it looks like it comes so naturally. And I guess it's just, sometimes it's a bit of practice around just doing that in the moment. And I guess what I've learnt about that as well is the value of storytelling, and how the story can give you the hook for the kids to understand what you're trying to say to them. And so what I started to do mainly this year was just sort of journal a whole bunch of stories that you could just keep. And then when you wanted to hook the kids in something that you wanted to talk about, you could bring out your story and then off you go and run with it. So an example, often I'd use my kids as an example. So I've been still journaling stories because we have to do mission school improvement next year around Catholic identity and things like that. And so my daughter gives me gold. She's in kinder, and her school at the moment are doing like a Vinnie's appeal. So for people who are less fortunate. And then she was saying to me yesterday, can I take some icy poles for the unfortunates? And she was using the word unfortunate. And I was like, they're called less fortunate. And then we talked about the prefix un meaning not. And so it's like, are they not fortunate? And how are they not fortunate? And I said, they're just less fortunate. So they have, they might not have special treats because they can't afford special treats and things like that. So it opened up a whole discussion, but it was just one of those beautiful moments with a kinder kid who has no filter and trying to understand the world. And so it's like that story goes in the bank now of when we're talking mission review.
Oh, and kids have the best, they make the best stories. And I think.
But that school's having an impact in her because they're teaching her about this stuff. And then as parents, we're the ones there that help her to make more sense of what the school's trying to do as well. So the other quick one on her, because I could tell stories all day about her, she said at the start of the year, she goes, I've had enough about learning about Jesus. like she was in term 1 in kinder in a Catholic school, had enough learning about Jesus. And I was like, oh, what's going on? She goes, yeah, it's about time we learn about God. I want to learn about God. And so she was straight
That's
into
funny.
it. So it was funny. But I think stories are a good way in for kids. And so now I'm learning that that also works with adults when we're doing professional learning around things. We start with stories and then we get them to talk about their own stories in small groups. So that way they can connect and straight away, you've got people participating as opposed to just watching our slide deck and
Yeah.
kind of tuning out or doing other things. So
Yeah, stories are so engaging. But who do you think is the most challenging audience, kids or adults?
I reckon parents.
Parents,
Kids,
yeah.
I would hook every time because if it's going pear-shaped, you can always throw in a good dad's joke and you'll get them laughing. And so they're fine to engage. Teachers are usually pretty on board because you're their boss. And so when
Yeah.
you're the principal, it's like, they'll laugh at your bad jokes and things like that. But the parents were always a bit trickier because you don't see them all the time. And they're often the ones who throw the curveballs at you. Like probably the example I'd give was we were running a PNF when I was in Dorrigo, and the parents there were getting a little bit annoyed that when we fundraised for the Canberra excursion to help every kid to go, the parents were like, well, only the money from the kids, money only goes to the kids if the parents help to do the fundraising. And I was like, no, that's not what we teach. It's for the good of all. And so you had to sort of convince them that that's what we were going to do. And no matter what, it wasn't pro rata or whatever. I don't know. It must have been some system they had at the preschool that kind of was a little bit of a hangover into the school. And we just said, no, well, we're Catholic and this is what we do as Catholics for the good of all. And so we fundraise and then everyone gets the discount, even if they weren't at the barbecue or whatever we were doing.
Yeah.
But they're a tricky group. They're a tricky group because you're the one there teaching them then about church teachings where they don't really experience that in their lives necessarily. So they've chosen your school probably for quality education, not for the faith element. And so it's a bit of a challenge around just providing them just enough information without getting into an argument, because it wasn't an argument. We weren't going to change our mind on it. So they had no chance of winning that one, which was, that was our position, and that's, it was unwavering almost. So
yeah. Yeah, and parents are tricky, or families are tricky because they come from so many different upbringings and experiences that they tend to bring those into their child's schooling. So speaking around parent and family engagement, how do you actually implement strategies within your schools in the diocese to actually engage parents a lot more in, I suppose, understanding how school works and also engaging in their children's learning?
Yeah, I think probably to answer that, you need to go back through to COVID times. So what we lost in COVID times were, parents were locked out of schools, and there was a huge range of distress from parents. Like, we can't come in. Like, we went from parents able to walk into the school and collect their kids from on the grounds to we'd see them at the car pickup in the U-turn bay virtually, and that was as close as they could get to the school. And it was like that for 2 years up our way. I know it was worse in Melbourne probably, and you had lots longer lockouts and all sorts of things as well. But coming out of that, we firstly, we enjoyed the break from having all of the interaction with parents, and we probably were in a point where we needed a bit of a break. And then coming out of it, we were more intentional on how we got our parents back into the school. So intentionally doing something every term was something we had in our strategic plans. And so it might have been like term 1, it's definitely, it's a welcome barbecue. So you get the new families in, like your kinder families or any new kids in, socializing with other parents. And then each term there was a specific focus. So you might have gone term 2, like a learning focus around whatever you might have been doing. I remember a few where we had sort of maths games nights where we just get the families in and play maths games, and then they were always fun and good to be part of. And then some other nights were just family fun nights where we just wanted the families to be together and having fun. And so those nights were like a trivia night, as an example, where we just ran trivia and silly games, and it was all
Have
good
fun.
fun. Yeah, just to have fun. And then towards the end of the year, it was always our family partnership type events for really come and be part of these events. And it was like end of year assemblies and or coming to the graduation mass and helping either with setup or serving and things like that. So yeah, we ended up being intentional in some new families who started. So we got word of mouth feedback and also feedback in numbers. Like we would say, how many are coming? Like of a 50 kids school, we'd be like, how many do you reckon we'll get? And I would always say, well, we get about 80 people total. And then we'd always bust 100. So you'd always get like siblings and grandparents and whoever would come, because also if you feed them, they'll come as well. And so you can do anything on the back of providing good catering as well. And so that was a good way to get them in. So it was dinner first and then the agenda, whatever it is we were implementing. And sometimes for our families, dinner with their kids was a good thing to do as well. So it's just building connection time, sitting down and talking together, and modeling good socializing behavior and things like that. So I think I learned a lot by just having that as a strategy. So you get them in the door, make sure they're fed, and then you can roll out anything afterwards, like whatever it is, whether
And of
it's fun
course,
or education. So yeah.
yeah.
And then now where my daughter is, they do lots of things as well. And I've just been invited. So next year I'll be part of it's like a parish school forum. So it's a parent group that helps oversee all the initiatives they do. And their principal said to me, I want you to be part of it. We want to be a bit more targeted for why we're doing things. And so this school does heaps because they've got about 400 kids. So they've got heaps of staff. And so like this term alone, there's been a movie night, a milk bar choir, a car rally. And so they've got like 4 or 5 events every term. I think there's a water slide night coming up. And I'm just like, we can't keep up with all that stuff. Like we can't go to everything that you're going to, but
Yeah.
certainly happy to be part of that parent group and support the school. And it sort of gives me a little bit of a chance to see how it all comes together as well from their perspective, and probably go in as a learner and go, I wonder why they're doing all these things like the movie night and the milk bar choir and all this. So
yeah,
and
what's
we
the
go to
purpose and what are the
yeah.
outcomes for the students?
Yeah. I thought the movie night, I was like, oh, I don't know if that would be so good. And then I went along and my daughter sat with me because her main friends didn't go. And so she sat with me the whole night. She loved it. It was one of the best nights.
Yeah.
I
And
kind of
that's about
undervalued it.
connecting with your child, isn't it?
Yeah, but I undervalued the value of that night. Like I thought, oh, it won't be as good as I think it will. And then on the way home, it was really good. It was one of her favourite nights. So
Yeah, and probably your favorite memory too.
yeah. And then the milk bar choir was fun, where it was kids and parents learning to sing a song. And so we went along to that. And my younger daughter, who's only 3, she can't talk, but she was there dancing away and having a great old time at it. So it's like, it was pretty fun. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And in terms of a strategic approach to family engagement in the diocese, is there a framework that you're currently using
Yeah,
to
so
roll out to schools?
we have a fullness of life framework, and one element of that is family school community partnership. And schools are expected to have a sort of 3-year vision for what they're doing in that, and each school is different. So where I was this year, we were rolling out the Resilience Project, which is a commercial group led by Hugh Van Kylenberg, and part of that was we wanted to teach kids about gratitude, and we wanted to teach kids some more sort of pro-social behaviour skills as well, and help parents with that sort of stuff and emotional regulation. And so that became part of our strategic plan for this year. And then we have actions that drew the parents into parent events that was specifically to help educate them on that
Yeah.
as well. And obviously I left partway through the work because we did one term with it, and then I think the parent event was scheduled for the second week back in term 2. So I was sorry to miss it, but I did all the lead up organising, and then obviously that's on its own journey now without me being there. But that's an example of, we had a bit of a focus on family school community partnerships as a domain of something that we know is valuable and needs to be carefully curated, I guess, and then you take actions in that. And then what we're trying to do now in my role is measure the impact of those actions. Like, did we have any impact? What parts of Tell Them From Me, student data or parent data tells us that those things were effective? Does it eventually lead to improved student learning outcomes as well? Or, is it just wellbeing outcomes that we measure or whatnot? So there's that that's our approach here. So it's part of a framework, and then it becomes part of school plans, and they can choose their focus. And we were tracking data based on numbers, and lots of schools do that as well. And so last year, when we deliberately went to one event per term, and then we were getting over 100 participants, we're like, well, parents want this. They want to be here. And they're telling us they're voting with their feet, basically. They're in the school and bringing like grandma and grandpa or aunties or siblings, and they were really well-attended events. And so it was like we're getting the data. And then you get a little bit of feedback through Google Forms and things on the night. So you get a bit of, this night started too early or too late, or, how you could tweak it for next time. So
so you've got a captive audience there who are really willing to come into the school, and then I suppose just building on that around engaging them more in the children's learning and how that impacts their actual learning.
Yeah.
And with the use of data, how are you using data, or how do you actually collect data through the diocese, through all the schools normally? And how crucial is that to your strategic direction in terms of working through all of that data and seeing where you need to improve across the whole diocese in each school?
Yeah, so Tell Them From Me would be a main source at the moment for perception data. So you get students, parents, and teacher or staff data around learning and wellbeing outcomes. And we've only had it for 2 years. So the schools that have that data have 2022 data and then 2023. And then the mantra from Tell Them From Me, or one of their slogans, is know your impact to grow your impact. And so what we do in our roles at the moment is help schools find out what they're doing well and where they're really, perception-wise, students think this is great, and then find out where there's gaps and just go, well, that's an area where you could potentially put more effort in to see if you can move that perception data in a more positive trend. So to talk about a learning example, one of my schools was focusing on helping the parents, because there was a desire from the parents to know more about what the kids were learning at school. And so they put in a strategy around sending home a scaffold every term around what the learning would be in English and maths. And so they were going to test that as a way to support parents to know more about what the kids were learning, and they were going to provide, I think, one scaffold, but then update it 3 times a term with a bit of a progress of your child is, on track, not on track, or, working beyond what we set out to achieve. And so they just wanted their parents to know a bit more about the learning. So they were testing that out as a mechanism. And so they rolled out something like that in term 2 and then term 3. And then as the year progressed, they were going to, again, refine it in term 4. And I guess when you work towards Tell Them From Me next year, which is in term 2, they've potentially had 3 goes at rolling out this action. And it's like, did that have any impact on parents understanding learning? And so you get a bit of feedback then. The coaching around that strategy would be what do you collect along the way? Like, how do you know along the way that that's going to work? Like, can you afford to wait until term 2, 2024 to know that that works? And so it's really up to the school to talk with kids, like student voice type interviews. Do these things help you? You know, do they start conversations at home? How could we improve what we're doing? Things like that. And then getting to I guess, parents and just asking them. Their approach was going to do it anecdotally, so just whichever parents, like a bus pickup time or car pickup time.
Yeah.
So they hadn't necessarily thought of a formalized way to collect it, but they were thinking more about like just building it into conversations with parents. Like, how about that learning scaffold? Is it useful? Like, what can we tweak? How do we make it better? Do you know what your kid's learning and how they're going and things like that? So I think at that level, I think what they're working for is a good approach, as long as they don't wait too long. And hopefully the 2024 Tell Them From Me gives them that little uptick in that one small area, which is pretty much, do I know my learning, what my kids are learning and how to support them, or something like that is the question. So
yeah. And what do you see are the benefits of parents knowing what their children are learning and having a bit more of a bird's eye view of their progress throughout the term rather than just 2 reports a year?
yeah, so in that case, in that school, the parents wanted to know more. That was what they really were asking for. So that was their one area from Tell Them From Me that really stood out, that the principal really wanted to influence. And so they honed in on that specifically. The reports twice a term on A to E don't always show growth. And so the schools at the moment are challenged to, how do you regularly show growth? And so this is a big school. It had about 600 kids. And you're challenged in that space then to, how do you show your parents that your kids are making progress when you've got 3 streams of 30 kids or 30 plus classes? Like, they're big class groups, and so there was a fair bit of challenge around just the numbers on that alone. And so they were trying this as a strategy firstly, which was more like it was generic then for each year level. So it was like, this is what we're learning in English, this is what we're learning in maths, and here's a bit of an update on progress. So it was quite achievable, they felt, in terms of not adding extra workload, or not a great extra workload for teachers, but then being able to provide a bit more info to parents. So not sure if they've had success, because I haven't been back this term necessarily to check in on it, but certainly would be a question early next year around
Yeah,
what
and
sort
then
of
I guess
feedback they're getting.
there's also the question of being held accountable if the child isn't growing in their learning, and how you actually manage those conversations with parents. Because once you open the floodgates to providing that information, having a strategy in place to be able to have those conversations and that dialogue to be able to support the student.
There's a fair bit of learning around that, though, isn't there, too? Like, attendance that impacts learning, other situations that are happening at home or at school impact learning. So it could be, at school could be a bullying type issue that's distracting the child. It could be family breakdown at home that's causing problems. And so I think if we can educate our parents that learning's hard work, it takes time, it takes repetition, it takes some hard work from the kids, and that's not a bad thing, that it doesn't just happen. The kid doesn't go from A to B because we want them to. It happens because, we all understand where they are in their learning, and some subjects are harder than others for kids. Like, I've met so many kids that love maths and don't like English, and it's like, and vice versa. And so if parents could understand that, there's an opportunity there, isn't there, for that school to go a bit deeper with it as they do the work and unpack the progression. I hadn't heard of that one as coming up as being a problem, but I'd imagine it would be, there could be panic, couldn't there, on the parents' behalf of like, oh, my kid didn't learn this term, or they're not on track. And
and a lot of the time parents are almost conditioned from their past in focusing on the end result, rather than the actual growth, and not really having an awareness of how learning happens for children, and really having an understanding that even if they haven't shifted in their mark, they could still have grown in their learning, but having that explained to them is a much better approach.
Yeah.
So
there's an opportunity for teachers too in there as well. So teachers are accountable to finding how to help the student to learn as well. And so that can become a dialogue with parents or even with the student involved as well. So you could have that three-way type, I noticed this is happening and how do we progress that? Like, how do we help you to learn that? And, there's that sort of chance to talk about what else could be done and track it each term. So that I think it's not a bad strategy. So to sort of help scaffold.
And like you said, it creates an opportunity for dialogue that may not be there and an early intervention if needed.
Yeah. Not waiting till term 4 when they get the end of year report and find that the child is still below in English or, it's like, well, they know through the year that this is a hard subject and my kid has to work extra hard to get there. And they might know also what the school's doing then to help and then what they can do at home. So, yeah, there's good opportunities.
Yeah. I just wanted to touch on, just before we finish, just on school culture and how in your current role in school improvement, how you're supporting your schools to develop their school culture for school improvement. And I suppose how you create your professional learning opportunities with staff to actually support the development of culture in schools.
Yeah, so at the moment we use what was the National School Improvement Tool, about to become the School Improvement Tool. And schools every 3 years get reviewed using that tool. And we have an external reviewer from ASA who helps us with that. And Domain 3 is all around the culture of the school. And so there's a bit of there's exploration into each school and their context and what each school's culture looks like. Post those reviews is where our work sort of begins with the school. And so we work closely with the leadership team to go and unpack pretty much where the schools are now and where they want to be. And in order to improve, there's a few things that need to happen. So one, it has to be sort of led by the principal, so it's their vision for the school. But the key part of it is it needs to be owned and enacted by virtually all the staff. So the ASA mantra is all the people all the time. And so that's the ideal, obviously. And we know it's a lot more complex than that in schools. But it's more just trying to get the staff behind the school improvement plans and the 3-year plan and the annual plan, and making sure that they understand or see their work in the plan, and they're all part of that. And that's the challenge. But probably the biggest cultural piece I think that we could focus on into the future would be, yes, we're schools, we have to create these conditions for learners. So there has to be, we have to be driven by student learning outcomes, but we also have to create the culture of learning amongst staff, and so that all staff become learners as well. And that's really a big piece of work as well. So it sort of has to be a dual focus. Like, if you're going to teach kids to read, you need to understand, all of the steps involved with teaching kids to read, including what happens if they're not reading and where you go to if not. And you've got to be a learner in that space as a teacher to understand all of that. So schools need to create that sort of we're all here to learn mentality. And I don't think you'll ever be a teacher and know everything. And so you've always got something you can learn. And I think that speaks to the cultural piece of it's not just about, respect and getting along and whatnot. It's about create the conditions for students to learn and create the conditions for staff to learn alongside them. So
yeah, a whole learning community, including parents.
Yeah. Well, bring the parents in as well.
Parents as learners as well.
Yeah. Parents, what I always found was we would not, like, say we wanted to focus on maths and, have an initiative on that. You bring the parents in, we weren't getting 100 people into those maths nights. You might only get 25 in. It's like, why don't you want to learn about maths? But then it's their own sort of, I didn't like maths at school. I don't want to come into a maths night or whatever. So, but it doesn't mean you don't stop trying those initiatives around whatever you're focusing on, because if you can build the parent knowledge, then they're there to help the kids. So
Definitely. So before we finish up, is there anything else you'd like to share for other leaders or aspirational leaders in, I guess, one piece of advice you would give from your wisdom and your knowledge?
You won't have all the answers, so just be a learner and learn from every situation. So you'll get a lot of curveballs in education, and you've just got to be open to learning. And I think, again, if I had my time over as a principal, I'd designate some time to really looking at what evidence-based approaches could look like, and even researching yourself. Like, because you work in a system, they go, you've got to do this initiative. It's like, well, yes, okay. And so then you need to learn about that and really unpack it. And then you do have some autonomy, though, to go and find your own evidence-based approaches as well. So just sort of being up to date and well read in that space, and then learning from what you implement and looking at your impact, and being open to that approach, I'd say. So yeah, pretty easy, isn't it?
Yeah, very easy. No, it's been a pleasure to learn from you today, and I really like the theme of the whole interview today around being a lifelong learner and just continuing to improve yourself as a person and as a professional. I'm really excited to share this with other leaders and other educators and people who want to learn from leaders such as yourself. So I'd like to wish you well in your new position, and I'm hoping that we can touch base again and learn more about what you've achieved.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for your
All
time.
right.
Hope you got something good out of today.
Absolutely.
Edit all the good bits.
Yes.
Right.
No, thank you so
then.
much for
Thanks.
your time. Okay.
That's okay.
Bye-bye.
See you, bye.
Well, what another inspiring interview in our Leadership in Education series of our Creating Connections podcast. If you enjoyed this interview and would like to learn more from other leaders in education, please click on the subscribe button to receive further podcasts on your feed. If you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, click on the link below to book a meeting with me to learn more about you and your leadership in education. Or if you're listening to this podcast, send an email to rachel@practicallylearning.com.au to express your interest in being on the podcast. If you are a school leader or teacher with aspirations for leadership, but you're challenged with self-doubt, overwhelm, and whether you have what it takes to take that next step, our Connect with Your Mind Mastery Coaching Program can support you to work on your own self-mastery to become the leader you aspire to be. For further information about our coaching and professional learning programs, please visit our website at practicallylearning.com.au or click on one of the links below and visit our podcast for our future series of interviews to support you as the adults who are guiding children on their learning journey. I do hope you enjoy the rest of our episodes on our Creating Connections podcast, and I hope to meet you soon.